I'm very pleased to be joined on the desk here with Hayden Cardiff of a company called Idelic Incorporated. And this is a company that that was spun off from Pitt, Ohio. And it's a very interesting story. Hayden, could you tell us a little about how this business got started and the nature of your relationship with Pitt, Ohio?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me, Dan. It all kind of starts with safety and how important safety is throughout the industry. And Pitt, Ohio, over the past 2 decades, has really grown to be one of the leaders within safety. And that it was in large part not only to their safety culture, but also because of an internal application that they had built from the ground up. They're called Safety Box. And so that program was essentially in response to the lack of information they were able to gather throughout all the different systems that helped them understand driver behavior. And so they tried to remedy that by building the system. And what they were able to do was pretty remarkable. They were able to start to integrate a lot of the systems together. They were able to essentially start to understand driver behavior in a way that they'd never been able to do before, because they started to have more of that data at their fingertips. And so what they realized, though, is there was so much potential in this software, and there's so much potential in the overarching value to the industry as a whole that they couldn't get out there, because they are a trucking company, and they knew that that's what they did well, and software wasn't necessarily, software commercialization wasn't necessarily something that they were trying to pursue. And so I knew Chuck Hamill, the CEO there, and we had a lot of conversations around this, and we decided that the best opportunity for getting this technology and getting this idea of being able to kind of bring all of that information and predict and help prevent accidents to the industry would be to spin off into its own separate software company. So I pulled together a team, and we spun out, and we took that initial application, or the initial prototype is what we have come to call it, and we've rebuilt that from the ground up and added a lot of really cutting edge technology to it. And one of the things that was really interesting to us was to see kind of the ability that Pitt, Ohio had in predicting accidents, and what we've been able to add on top of that with technology like machine learning and predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. And so looking back at some of the benefits that they were able to see with this original product, Safety Box, they saw about 21% accuracy in being able to identify and predict which drivers would ultimately get in accidents. And so going from no prediction to almost a quarter of all accidents being able to intervene beforehand, that was amazing. But what we've been able to see is in being able to tie in all of the different systems in a much more integrated fashion and a much more streamlined process through API integrations, and being able to run all of this data through a predictive analytical machine learning model, we've seen that number jump from 21 to now over 90%. So being able to pinpoint 9 out of 10 drivers and give corrective action and coaching before those accidents happen.
Yeah, interesting. This is a good example of what I was talking about earlier, of companies having in their own company data that is potentially very useful. And in your case, you're using the safety data in a way that not only helps Pitt, Ohio, but something that could help the whole industry if we can get our hands around, all of the information that.
Absolutely,
right?
And I think gone are the days that data is too sparse, or we don't have enough to really make good decisions. Now it's fleets are just getting inundated. There's just too much data available, and not enough insights coming from that data to do something with. And so that was one of the first problems we looked at tackling, was how do we take this fire hose of data that often seems just overwhelming to fleets and make good decisions and get real insights out of that. And I think that was one of the first things that we wanted to do, and I think we've been very successful in not only with customers and partners like Pitt, Ohio, but also the other fleets that we work with, and potentially the industry at large, and being able to now take in all of these different data sources, like your onboard telematics, your cameras, your FMCSA portal, the HR systems, your trainings, the background checks, driver qualification files. There's so much data there, but for us as human beings, it's incredibly difficult pretty much impossible to be able to look at all those different data sets across all of your drivers and then be able to pull out which the leading indicators and be able to weight what's more important versus another and make good understanding and good decisions based on that prediction.
Yeah. What advice would you give other trucking companies who may be interested in working with startups or bringing in people from outside? Where do they find the talent, I guess, and where do they get the money? How does it work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ryan brought up a great point as far as working with places like Dynamo, right? So there are definitely vehicles out there for trucking companies and people within this industry to go out and work with incredibly talented, incredibly smart people who might not have the trucking background to go in and solve really interesting problems. And I think the issue arises, especially when you have really smart, really bright people who don't have that trucking background to try to come in and impose their view, or I guess their mantra upon the trucking industry, which gets a bad rep for being slow moving and not being adopting technology. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's definitely more so the case of there has to be that ingrained trucking know-how, right? Other people trying to come in and push solutions that don't fix real problems just because the technology is available doesn't help anyone. And so I think trucking fleets and other people within the transportation logistics industry have a real strong opportunity to bring what they do best to the table, which is trucking, which is logistics, which is transportation, and then allow that to kind of permeate through the technology and those trying to come into the industry with a little less knowledge. And so we've been very, very fortunate in having partners like PITT Ohio, who, in my opinion, have done really, really well at giving us the opening doors and helping us, I guess, better understand some of the issues and problems around trucking. Even though a lot of our team had transportation backgrounds, there's still, we don't know everything, right? It takes seasoned professionals to really get a good understanding of the transportation and logistics world. And so being able to work with partners who can go hands off when it comes to day-to-day running the company and let us kind of do our thing, but also open doors and really help us with the problems at hand and making sure that we stay rooted to our trucking background is really important. So I think if you strike that balance as far as understanding what you can do and what you bring to the table and letting the companies that are trying to start these companies that are trying to bring innovation to the industry also do what they're really good at, I think there's a good partnership to be had.
Yeah. Do you think there's a real change in attitude in the industry towards innovation? When you're approaching companies, what do you find? I mean, do you find them a little hesitant or is there some excitement on their part in pursuing some new ideas?
There's absolutely a tremendous excitement around innovation and technology, especially in trucking and transportation. And I think, again, the industry gets a bad rap. And I think that goes back to needing that hard ROI for them to adopt any technology. And you can't fault them for that. I think now with technology being as prevalent as it is, with the ability for other vendors to now come in and really understand the problems at hand, really understand where the big ticket items that these fleets are struggling with, driver turnover, accident rates, combining and connecting all of their third-party systems and getting the value out of government-mandated technology that is in the trucks now with ELDs and certain aspects of telematics. I mean, without those connecting and without really getting as much value, they're not seeing the ROI. And so being able to come in and now express and identify what are these main pain points, how we can specifically address driver turnover, how we can specifically address accident reduction and prevention. That resonates, and we've seen tremendous response from the industry, and we've been very, very welcomed as far as what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I mean, the other key aspect of this is the driver, and I think you've done well at mentioning them within the equation. I think a lot of the new technology in the past has come out without really thinking about the drivers in mind. And I think, you look at some of the camera technologies and others that have gotten a little bit of pushback from the driver pool, and I think it was because they weren't really considered within that equation. I think now people are starting to really bring that in and say, all right, how do we not only benefit the fleets themselves, how do we benefit the industry as a whole, but now how do we bring the drivers back into this equation and really make them more comfortable, more benefited throughout this process.
Yeah, excellent. I'd like to interject a question now that we received from one of our readers, or viewers, I should say. Heather Darrington of a company called Flash Freight Systems has asked where drivers are looking to find driving positions in the industry. And this question of where to find drivers is definitely a moving target. But what's clear to me in my reporting is that drivers have become a real force in the marketplace that hasn't always been the case. So we are short of drivers, we always have, but with the strong market that we're in, drivers have a voice now that I think more executives are paying attention to. Right. So there's kind of a role reversal going on here where companies, executives are learning or at least paying attention more to their drivers and what they need to do their jobs. And in your case, since you're working with safety data and so forth, can you talk a little about what you see as the future possibilities of using this data over time? Because I think it's something that maybe could help drivers.
Absolutely, and I think you're spot on when you say that right now with the shortage and rates continuing to rise, it's just a good time for trucking companies as a whole, but yet the drivers now are at such a premium. And they're starting to get a little bit more of that power kind of shifted back on their side. And I think that's critical for them, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But also, they still lack a little bit of a vehicle and a voice to now rise up from the rest. And so with only a background check and an MVR to wield in front of a potential hire, or potential fleet to go work for, there's not really a whole lot that distinguishes a safe driver from an average driver, right? So how do they go about really understanding and really pushing their brand as a driver and their ability to get better jobs and better positions at better fleets? And so what we see as the potential is the opportunity for the drivers themselves to now have this data, this credibility go with them from fleet to fleet. Right?
Yeah, so what you're talking about, I think, is the idea of giving a driver a risk score, right? Which is based on your analysis of their driving records and a variety of things. And the analogy that you used was that most people are familiar with a credit score that they have is based on your purchasing practices, right? Well, drivers have a record of some kind, but as you said, it's difficult to put that on paper, if you will, and put it into a number that they can use. But it sounds like you're thinking that there's potential here for drivers to have an objective source of information about their real safety record, and then they could certainly use that to their advantage.
Absolutely, and we like to think of it as a safety score, right? So the drivers can now go in and have a full understanding of how they're doing, how they can improve, but more importantly, it creates kind of a win-win for the drivers themselves and the fleets, right? So the fleets, on the flip side, are throwing darts in the dark and trying to hire drivers that they don't have sufficient data and insight as far as their history, their background, their reliability. And so you get a lot of this turnover that we're seeing run rampant through the industry because there's not the culture fit, there's not the understanding of the driver's performance. And so this helps really the driver to rise above the rest and be able to kind of promote themselves with a good, solid understanding of, look, I am a safe driver. I'm very responsible, and I do my job, and I'm a professional.
Mm-hmm.
And then be able to take that to a fleet and say, look, you want me. And the fleet being able to, on the flip side of that, knowing exactly what they're getting. And even if there are some, there's some things in the driver's past, they now understand where to help that driver. And that's, for us, that's our biggest thing. When we go to fleets, telling them, hey, we can help you identify your best drivers, but also your most at-risk drivers. That is not so they can go and get rid of drivers or fire. That's so they can help keep them, coach them, get them back to where they need to be. Because if you don't know anything, you're letting good drivers either walk out the door, or drivers who need help are going without the training or the coaching specific to their needs that will get them back on the road safely. I mean, we've had fleets come to us who are using our software and say, look, you helped us prevent an accident because we had no clue something was going on, but you flagged this driver who was traditionally safe. A couple telematics events, there was an HR, they came late to work, an argument with the manager, small backup accident, non-DOT recordable at a terminal. We pulled him in and realized his parents needed to go into assisted living home. So he wasn't focused on the job, he was stressed out, and so they gave him a couple days off, took care of his business, they came back and performed normally. Now, that not only is an accident saved, but also that driver's job. And so our whole goal is retention by prevention. So essentially helping these fleets keep their drivers and helping the drivers get the help they need to keep them on the road safely.
Yeah, thank you very much.